I think one of the big concepts I think is important is to understand that mixing isn't just about leveling like your faders and just like, oh, let's just put everything up on the fader and we'll move things around and everything will be perfect. There's so many other facets to it with things fighting each other frequency wise, and then amplitude playing effect in there with dynamics processing, and then of course there's panning and depth, all those things that play in there to make everything have a space. But it's so much more than it's like, I guess the novice would think, oh yeah, you just put it in the mixer and then move faders around and you're good. There's so much more.
That's like level more, yeah.
That's like level 0.
Mixing is like, it definitely, like there's a science to it, but I also think it's like more of an art once you get to that point. But when you're starting out, you're like, oh my gosh, there's all these technical things that I don't know how to do. Like, what is an EQ or what's a compressor? And we'll talk about those things in future episodes. But yeah, should we talk about workflows now?
Yeah, go ahead. Let us know your workflow.
Yeah. So my basic workflow with mixing, I think the biggest thing that helps me get a good mix is actually the preparation, going through, making sure I have everything grouped and color coded correctly to how I like, and then checking gain, going back to gain staging, making sure that I have like a decent, healthy level starting out. And then they call it like gut mixing. Basically, I'll go through and I'll listen to the song one time without doing anything. And then I'll go back through and in real time, change just the faders. And I try to maintain that volume throughout the rest of the process as I do my EQ and compression. So I don't want to put a compressor on and all of a sudden make the signal louder and be like, oh, this is better. But really it's just louder. And so I think it's better, if that makes sense.
You're talking about like mixing at a consistent level so that the Fletcher-Munson curve, like what you're hearing, the equal loudness contour isn't affecting your perception of the frequencies.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a whole nother podcast in itself, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
go on about that.
Munson.
I know we have some mastering engineers out there that would love to tell us about
how bad we are at our job. I mean,
no, but
how good.
But how important it is. I mean, I know one specifically who is really big about making sure to mix at an equal level at the same time within like 3 dB.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. I actually, after I talked with him about it, I tried to do that. I actually got a volume control, a monitor controller that stepped, so I can go back to that same point.
Oh, that's cool. I should do that when I master.
But just in mixing, so you do it in mixing for that point of what you're saying. Try to keep it consistent.
In mixing, I do that, but I should also apply that to mastering. But
I kind of have a point I do mixing, and then another point I do the mastering at.
Mastering.
I'll let you go.
Yeah, it really depends from song to song, though. Like if you have like a really dense mix, it's kind of hard to like get. I don't know. I was working on a mix for a client, and I felt like I had a hard time getting a loud sounding mix because there were so many tracks, which was kind of interesting to me. You'd think that more tracks would make it easier to get a loud mix, but just to get everything balanced and everything sounding good on its own, but then also in context was really difficult because of all those tracks.
Yeah. More isn't always
That's
better.
why you just get rid of all the stupid doubles and stuff, and just you don't need 7 kick sounds to make a freaking kick drum.
You don't need 80 guitar tracks.
Yeah, like why would you stack 20 vocals?
There were literally like 80 guitar tracks.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Another thing on my mixing philosophy, I do not pan until the very end for the most part. I don't like to pan until the very end because I feel like I get a lot better sonic separation if I save panning for the end. And then I'm like super big on LCR panning. So I'll only for the most part, I'll just hard pan left or right or keep it in the center. Very occasionally I'll put things in the middle of those, but I
very much disagree with that.
Yeah, that's one of those. That's another famous mixer philosophy there, Bryant.
That is a famous mixing philosophy. Learned that from a famous mixer.
Famous mixer, yeah. Well, that's funny because for me, I do level and panning, like preliminary level and panning. Like that's my first, that's part of the gain staging. That's the first step is like just getting a really, really rough mix, just so that I'm not like, when I'm trying to do processing, I'm not like screaming when the guitar like comes in and is super loud. It's just kind of to get things like, not going crazy. But one of my biggest things is to actually put off like reverb and effects till the very, very end. To me, that kind of will muddy stuff up. And I mean, you can use those things to get more clarity too.
Yeah.
Which if you use them properly, they do help with clarity. But my thoughts are, I want to get clarity with everything else, like dynamics and EQ, before I reach to reverb to get clarity. And then it just is even more clear and more brilliant if I do it that way. Which is what I found. So that's my step, is level panning, which gain staging is part of that. And then I like to do dynamics first, especially the tone shaping dynamics, first round of dynamics, and then EQ. And then, then it's like more leveling dynamics. And then I move on. Once I really have the whole mix good, then I go back and balance it again. And then after that, after I feel like I have everything in the right place, then I'll add effects. That's my workflow.
Go 58.
Right. I have actually two different workflows, because when I work studio, I have to think differently than when I work live. When I work live, my goal is to get the performers up as fast as possible and get them as comfortable as possible. So I kind of have to take some shortcuts, and I don't like it. That's why I like gain stagings first. I gain stage, pan, and then I actually will run EQs first, because EQing can take the longest amount of time and is the most noticeable. Then I will do dynamics after that, because I can always adjust and change dynamics in the middle of a show and no one's going to notice. Likewise, a philosophy when I'm running a live show is I'm addressing problems. I don't have I wish I had the luxury of like the tool sets that and it's because I'm not working on as nice a boards or with as much power in DSP as I would love to be working on. So 9 times out of 10, I'm working with a much more limited tool set, just because of the nature of the gear that I have. Yeah, again, gain staging, pan, EQ, compress, bus compress, effects. And effects are probably the last things to go on, but they will go on before the show. I may change my compressor settings throughout the show depending on the song. And I mean, again, like if I in a live situation, you kind of have to respond to the performers and the audience, and you have to kind of be watching that. Like sometimes a little bit more reverb or a lot more reverb sells it better, and it might be a little bit garish or gaudy. Yeah, I'll admit to that. But hey, those people are having a good time. Sure, half of them are drunk, but I don't care. They're having a good time. When it comes to the studio, it's kind of similar, because I like to start with gain stage. I'm like you, Bryant, where I like to color coordinate and organize the tracks and stuff, like, and name and label them, because like a lot of times I'm getting stems from places that don't have like actual names on them, but I know the numbers.
Mix prep is so important.
Yeah. I didn't really talk about that, but I agree that that's something I do first. Get it organized. So
right. I mean, and like at the end of the day, it'll make your life easier. So when I'm in the studio, though, I always set up my session, organize things. I don't run buses. I will not run buses in the setup phase when I'm designing everything. I don't always use buses and bus compression or bus EQing or like doing things in buses unless I'm like, oh, I've worked with this ensemble. I'm going to bus this horn section together and I'm going to EQ them individually and as a section. And I will do things like that to build cohesiveness, I think, like anyone would. But I don't do that until I've already gone through. So I've done setup, then I'll do my gain staging. I will pan at the beginning, because even though I think you will get more sonic separation from panning later on and keeping it as a mono mix, I feel like you're missing out on thickening up the whole mix that way. And I like to have them pan so that I have more sonic space to work with when they're in their locations. Also, I do not LCR pan. I pan and there's a reason why.
I was just throwing it down on you. Right.
No, I don't care that Bryant does things different than me. I do it this way because like when I pan things in relation to like the drum set, because I don't always have the luxury of recording drums in a different room or drums in a different location, and so I actually base a lot of things off of my overheads, my drum overheads, and their stereo place. So I will agonize over placing my toms and my snare and my hi-hat mics in relation to my overhead mics, as well as my left to right, my time on those things to help alleviate any kind of thinning or over thickening of the drum parts, as well as phasing issues and other issues associated with like the drum set. And I think from that perspective of drum space, then harmonic elements, it's actually drum space, vocals, harmonic elements. And that's essentially kind of the logic that I use when I'm mixing. But I start with panning after gain staging. And then from there, I like to EQ out any major problems. I like to remove problems. I like to just deal with the problems when it comes to EQing and other things like that, so that I'm not introducing that into my dynamics section. And so I always pretty much start with some form of EQing like that to remove issues, dynamics, and then actual shaping EQs, compression shaping. It depends. It depends on the element. It depends on the song. It depends on
it's like so dependent on the situation.
Yeah,
it's true.
It's hard to generalize it all down to just this is what it is, you know.
I don't wait to put reverb and effects on until the end. I will put them on after I've kind of gotten a general mix, like balance and left to right panning done, but I will turn them on and off as I go, because I need to understand it in context as I'm moving through the piece, because after each phase I like to go through and adjust my gain staging, because here's one thing I don't do. I save automation for the end. I try to get everything reasonably leveled. And then I will automate to create a more artistic move through the mix. And that's kind of generally my whole thing. And then I just kind of like flounder until I'm like, I think this is good. It sounds like music to me, I think, maybe.